Hi, my name is Justin, and I'm an addict. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am eternally grateful. Welcome to the RICO 12 speaker meeting. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite other recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom meeting each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. In order to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're hearing this podcast recorded and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, or if you'd like to be a guest speaker in a future meeting, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com to learn more and to submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations or to submit to become a guest speaker. Right now, we're filling dates in December and January for speakers. RICO 12 is an ad-free service, and we appreciate your help in keeping it that way. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the costs of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to reco12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal in the chat of the live meeting. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 17. Last week's meeting was with Dennis T., and his presentation on being free from lust was powerful. If you missed hearing that one or any other meeting we've done so far, you can listen to them in podcast form by searching for RICO 12 Speaker Meeting Podcast on virtually any podcast platform that you use. The last couple of weeks, we added Pandora and Amazon Music as two of the podcast platforms that we just added to who knows how many are out there now. That you can get the podcast on. Or you can just go to the RICO 12 website and find it under the link podcast. Now, about the RICO 12 Speaker Meeting Podcast recently, Harvey's Kid said this on Apple Podcasts. He said, "Excellent recovery resource. Week after week, the guests of RICO 12 bring honesty, insights, and hope as they share their personal experiences along their road to recovery. I feel like I'm meeting a new friend each week because of the speaker's willingness to be totally honest and vulnerable. The variety of perspectives and recovery tools shared by those with years of healthy sobriety has helped me immensely in my own journey. Regardless of the type of addiction, the RICO 12 podcast provides insight, perspective, and tools to help one move toward freedom and recovery." Thanks, Harvey's Kid. Appreciate that. Now, if you have also found value in this podcast, in this service, please take a moment to go to the podcast platform of your choosing and leave a rating and review. It helps us work our 12th step by carrying the message of recovery to more addicts who suffer. Now let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Heather. Heather has been working recovery since July 3rd of 2007. This date is the day that forever changed her life and brought her to the road of recovery. She continues to work the steps in her life and is grateful for the gift that God has given her to work Step 12 as a sponsor. She asks for your prayers that God will help her now and know what He would have her share today. Take it away, Heather. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, I'm Heather, and I am an addict and a spouse of an addict. I found recovery through an addiction recovery program that was created by my faith of origin. And it's simply called the Addiction Recovery Program. It's a super simple name, but that is where I began my healing journey. And then I was led there when I found out about my spouse, who I'd been married to for about 10 years, was a sexaholic. I now also attend SAL, Lifeline, and they use the S-Anon literature. So I'm going to be quoting a lot of that because I relate a lot to it, but I also relate a lot to addiction recovery. So you'll find as I read, or as I talk, but I flip-flop between both. So in S-Anon, the problem, it states, most of us grew up in families with secrets, and we're not taught to think about our own needs and take positive action to meet them. And I really relate to this. My childhood was filled with a lot of darkness. And my mom had mental illness and my father was completely disconnected. We didn't have any affection in our home. It was mostly anger and fighting, not a lot of love. And I was left home at a very young age because my parents both worked, and couldn't afford daycare. And so at about 7, I started becoming a latchkey kid. I would go to school in the morning on my own and would come home. And that kind of began my struggle with fear and loneliness of the outside world. I would run home. A lot of the times I walked home by myself. A lot of my friends cut through golf courses that I couldn't go through, so I was alone a lot. But then it goes on in the S&M program to say we chose friends and partners who could not or would not love and support us in a healthy way. We lived from the standpoint of victims and perceived any personal criticism as a threat. We acquired unhealthy beliefs about ourselves very early in our lives, that we were not worthwhile and lovable, that we were able to control other people's behavior, and that sex was the most important sign of love. Our self-esteem dropped to low levels, and we doubted our attractiveness and our emotions and our sanity. And since a very young age, I can remember just not feeling super accepted or acceptable. I tried really hard. I had a huge God hole already as a very young child, and I would fill it with hours of TV, especially when my parents were at work. I can remember just watching TV when I got home and just try and fill that pain and that void with as much TV as I could, but it was never enough. And I can remember at some point in my childhood, as a very young child, I was sexually abused. I don't have much of a memory other than darkness and in a closet and someone abusing me. And that's really all I remembered. But so I at a very young age started masturbating, I remember. And for a while it took pain away, and I felt relieved of the pain. And I can remember my mom catching me one time when I was probably about 7, and she shamed me and just kind of told me I could not do that and I shouldn't be doing that and all this stuff. And that kind of, I interpreted that as I was not acceptable again, and that I wasn't enough. And that was really hard for me. And this led me to this cycle of shame and addiction that I learned pretty early in high school. I figured out that if I was skinny and attractive to boys and an object to men, then I had value. I was acceptable and loved and no longer lonely. This led to more addictions. And actually, this addiction started in middle school, anorexia. And then as I got older, having relationships, self-harm. This led to some verbal, sexual, and emotional abuse by some of my partners. And I didn't know how to be involved in a relationship without abuse for a while. And I just felt like I was nothing. And I was consumed by being an object. And if I was an object to men, then I was acceptable. And if I wasn't, somehow I wasn't. And I was lonely and all those pain. And I don't know, it was this weird thing that happened. And I just kept repeating this cycle. I kept getting into abusive relationships and feeling codependent, and that if I had someone who loved me, even if it was awful, hard love, it was still love. And I just wanted to feel loved and accepted, and just wanted that pain to go away. And my parents had always taken me to church. So I am so grateful for them for that. I knew I felt something at church, and that belief in a higher power was there inside me, and it was growing during all of this mess, but I just didn't know how to get out of the way, and I didn't know how to connect with God or figure out how to access Him, and I just knew He was there, but I didn't understand, but I felt like He didn't care. Anyway, So my first abusive boyfriend was in high school, and I remember when he dumped me, I was devastated, and I felt so much shame. And it got to the point where I was suicidal. I remember being in my room. It was dark. I had the pills out. I was ready to take them all. I just wanted my life to end. I just felt worthless, and God didn't care. God wasn't even there. He was punishing me, all these things. And I just felt like I couldn't take any more. And at this point, I cried out. I remember crying out to God, even though I thought he didn't care. The pills were in the bowl. I was ready to take them all. And I remember feeling this, don't do it. I am here. And for whatever reason, I didn't. I slowly put the pills back in, and I knew it was God telling me he was there. And for a moment, I found sanity. And the next thing I knew, I was in another abusive relationship, and it just continued. Finally, in college, I was trying to get my life straightened out. I was out of all my abusive relationships. I had even had a couple of normal relationships, but sadly, they didn't last long because I just didn't know how to have a normal relationship or love, and I was trying to fill my God hole with men and love and all these things, trying just so hard to feel accepted. And so it just made those normal relationships crazier. And at this point, I had been praying pretty much through high school. I just felt like I had to, or God was going to punish me if I didn't try to talk to him. And I never had honest prayer. It was always what I felt like God wanted me to say, giving him gratitude, because if I didn't give him gratitude, he was going to hurt me somehow. That was just, from a young age, I remember that. And so I had been doing those things. But in college, I kind of started praying a little bit more of like guidance and help me kind of thing. And I had been studying scriptures of my faith tradition as well. I did that mostly out of fear, again, that God was somehow going to get me. And I just knew he was out there, but I don't know. It was such a contradiction from things I heard from other people, and it was just a very confusing time. And I had just broken up with a man that I deeply loved, but he didn't believe in a God. He was starting to leave God. He belonged to another religion or any higher power. And in fact, he was starting to move away from God and was kind of dabbling in drugs. And I knew God was letting me decide which path to take. If I should stay with him, because, he did love me, and not like he wasn't abusive, but I was so confused. And I remember praying anyway, and I came to the decision that I needed to leave that relationship, and I did, because God was giving me that choice, and I chose it, and I never regret that choice. And I was even starting to think of serving a mission for my faith, because I was so dedicated to God at this point in my life. And anyway, fast forward a little, I met my husband through a blind date in college. Yay, blind dates. And I thought he was perfect. He was everything I ever wanted in a partner. We shared the same faith tradition. He seemed like such a great man and perfect. I just thought he was perfect. And I couldn't understand why this perfect human being wanted to be with me, this used piece of trash, that had no idea how to love or be loved. Even his own mother thought I was not worthy of him, not enough, didn't want me to marry him, had rejected me. And I could understand why he wanted to marry me, because his own family could see that. And I just was like, why can't he see that he shouldn't want to marry me? And even my own father had told him no, that he couldn't marry me because I wasn't ready. It was me, again, me. Everything I felt like was me, and I was broken, and I was just a mess, and I was just so confused. And there were some flags that he wasn't perfect, but like it says in the Essanon literature, some of us minimized the importance of a sexaholic behavior or denied it until we felt emotionally numb. I denied a lot of signs or things, but I know I did marry him, and I was grateful I married him. I still struggled with, why would this perfect man want to marry me? This horrible, awful thing. I had shared a lot of my history with him and told him of a lot of the stuff from my past. And he still wanted to marry me, and I was so confused about that. And anyway, early in our marriage, he confessed to me, it was probably the first 2 years in our marriage, he confessed to me that he was having an inappropriate relationship with another woman. And how did I deal with it? Well, I left for a few hours and I almost left him. I was going to leave, but I'm glad I didn't now. And I went to a friend's house. She convinced me to go back. And I went home, and this is what I said: never speak of this again. And that is how I dealt with it. I buried that emotional pain deep. Because that's what I knew. I just knew you buried emotion, buried pain, and let's not talk about it ever again. I love you. Let's move on. Like, that is what I did. And during our marriage, I found sobriety in my own addictions through miracles of surrender. But I still felt empty and lonely and rejected and not accepted, no matter what I did or how many friends I had or how much my spouse loved me. I mean, like, I just tried to like fill this hole that I kept just was deep and empty. And I even tried to get my in-laws to accept me like family. And I was just trying to get like all these people to accept me and fill me and do all these things. And they may have, I don't know. I was so desperate to fill that I think I pushed a lot of people away. And I just didn't know what a healthy relation looked like. And I had lost all sanity at times. But 10 years into our marriage, it was July 3rd, 2007, I found out from my husband, and by his own admission, that he was struggling with what I know now to be sexaholism. I could look back in our relationship, and it was like suddenly I saw everything, and I knew, that first relationship thing, that first moment when I buried that, it just, all these things made sense. And I could look back, and I knew he wasn't perfect anymore, but he was as flawed as I was. And then suddenly I went from that to, I felt like I deserved all of it. Like I deserved the years of betrayal. I deserved the hurt. I deserved it all because God was punishing me. Like, that was the next thought that I had. And I felt responsible for his addiction. I even thought, even though at that point he said he wasn't an addict, I still felt responsible. And I spiraled out of control in my own addictions. I began to want to act out in them, especially with self-harm, just to numb the pain. And fortunately, I was pregnant with our last child at the time, and I knew I could not hurt this vessel that was carrying something from God, a baby. And I knew God had given me that baby, that pregnancy at the time, because it was totally unplanned. It was a total shock when I had gotten pregnant, because it was right in the middle of it when I found all this out, and it kept me going. It kept me from hurting myself. And anyway, I went to the leader of my congregation and I asked for help. I was desperate. I needed something. I was carrying around a computer in my car all the time. I was trying to hurt myself. It was just total chaos and total insanity. And he said I could go to this addiction recovery meeting. And he talked to me about forgiveness, and that I could forgive, but I didn't have to trust, and told me about the 12 steps and shared all these things with me. And I remember my first meeting, I walked in, it was me and one other person. And then there are these women that ran the meeting. And I went there thinking, I am going to change my husband. And I knew they were going to tell me how. And what I came to know in those meetings was 12 steps could change my life. And I needed the help. It wasn't just, I needed it. And I realized that attending these meetings, I hadn't found sobriety. I just replaced them. I still was addicted to the TV. I would talk on the phone for hours. People like avoided my phone calls. I know they did. There was spending problems, hoarding food. My husband can tell you I still struggle with that sometimes, buying lots of cereal. But thinking I wasn't worthy of certain things. And I realized there's this huge God hole. And I struggled with rage against my children because I just felt out of control and rejected. And I needed God. So for me, step one, I moved through pretty quickly. I knew I was powerless. I felt powerless, unmanageable, all those things. And then it was in step two that the miracle began for me. And it says in the Essanon book on step two, only a higher power can remove our obsessiveness. In step one, we learn that we are powerless over sexaholism and that our lives have become unmanageable, but we are not left alone. A power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. We all have a hunger, which we call a God hunger. We attempt to satisfy this hunger with a relationship with another person, that when we are really looking for a higher power. And that was me. That was my whole life. When I read that, I thought, that is me my whole life. That's what I've been doing. I had been afraid of God for so long. He was like the smoke that lived in the sky. I didn't really have any idea of who God was. He would punish me. The God I had created, I was afraid of. And I think a lot of it came from the fears I had and relationship with men. He didn't care. He was laughing at me all the time. He saw me as trash. He thought I was worthless. I just made so many mistakes that he was just waiting for me to make more. And he was cruel and abusive and hard. I had taken everything, all my experiences, and had just made him and created him into this thing that he wanted me to suffer in this life. And it was my sponsor who helped me so much with step 2. So I could move on to step 3, because without, trusting in God, I was knowing who he was, coming to understand him, I was never going to get to step 3. And so she made me write down who God was and really pray and ponder on it. And I spent the next few days wrestling with who God was. And I had to come to admit that I was not the highest power in the universe either, that I didn't have to be in control of all these things, that he wasn't expecting me to do all these things. And so in the S&O on step 2, it says, through our growing trust in the higher power, sanity is restored in our lives, and we move towards peace, serenity, and useful lives. I came to know God. I came to know who he was. And he was the exact opposite of what I had created. He was kind. He was loving. He was there. I could see him in everything in my life. I knew he knew me. I knew he watched me and was reaching out. I can look back through friends, people he put in my life, answers to prayers, like that they were there all the time. And I just didn't see it. And recently in a conference, I heard someone refer to the King James Bible in James, first chapter, verse 2, and it says, my brethren, or even sisters, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptation. And he talked about how I can count my weaknesses and my trials and my struggle, all those things that have brought me to my Savior, Jesus Christ, as joy. I know for me, there was no other way I was going to find my God or my Savior but through this journey. There's a Christian artist that I love. Her name's Hillary Weeks, and she sings a song called Beautiful Heartbreak. And that is exactly what my husband's addiction and my own addictions, it turned into this beautiful heartbreak. And my heart had to break. And I had to get to that point where I came to know God in no other way. I would never seen his hand in my life or come to know him in any other way had it not been for these steps and for my sponsor changing and my higher power changing my life. My sponsor did not change my life. It was my higher power and her being the guide, helping me see and helping me direct me back to him. And I am just so grateful for my husband's addiction. I never would have thought I would have said that in July 3rd, 2007. I would never have said that. But I can remember at the very lowest point, I crying in my closet. My kids were watching TV and I was crying in my closet, and I can remember praying, and I remember asking, I just need a hug. I just need something. And I remember feeling a hug. I don't know what it was, but I do know that whether it was God, whether it was Jesus Christ, whether it was a relative from beyond, came and gave me the biggest hug and just held me and let me cry. And I knew in that moment it was going to be okay, and God was going to help me, and he has. And I know that these steps have healed me and helped me, and without them, I am nothing. That's why I still work my 10, 11, and 12. And I am just so grateful to be here and to be able to share my story and and hopefully, that people can see their own hand of God in their own lives and recognize him like I didn't for so long. And so I'm just grateful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Heather. I am so grateful for your honesty and vulnerability and willingness to share that. What an awesome share. Thank you so much. Before we So if you, the listening audience, have any questions to ask of Heather, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll have 20 or so minutes of Q&A after this. But before we get to that, Heather, do you mind sharing for about 60 seconds or so the fellowship you attend and how that fellowship helps you?
Sure. I go to SA Lifeline, the spouse group mostly, and I do attend still my faith addiction and recovery meeting, and they both help me in different ways. But the fellowship to me is so important. It helps me find my center again, to remind me to come back to my higher power and to remember where I've come from. And I find strength remembering I'm not alone, because I struggled with loneliness. I still do. And thinking I'm alone. And I think that's really helped me remember I'm not alone and that God is there, and to hear other people share that and be reminded of that. So that's me.
Thank you, Heather. Very good. So we have a question that came in, and I'll preface it. In your share, you talked a lot about different prayer and getting guidance throughout your days. And Amy B says, "Such a wonderful share, Heather. You are awesome. What does your step 11 look like every day?"
Hi, Amy. I would say my step 11, I am a big believer in honest prayer now. I've had angry prayers. I've had angry prayers where I'm pretty angry, sad prayers, frustrated prayers. But I guess my step 11, every morning I start my day with prayer, scripture study. For me, I pray throughout the day, praying in my car, more so before COVID, but because I would be driving my kids places or whatever, or going to pick up my daughter from work, and it was always a quiet time that I could pray and I could just talk out loud with God. So I try and do that. I've been trying to practice two-way prayer. My husband introduced me to that, and so I try to take time. I love to pray in my closet and go and sit and I'll pray and then wait and listen and write the thoughts and things that come to my heart and just write about those things. And that's really helped me to get guidance from him. Also praying with my children. I'm finding I need to do that more often, but when I'm disciplining them, or we're having especially now with teenagers, that we're having like a moment where we're disagreeing, to pray with them. So I don't know. It's something I'm still working on. Prayer is something I think I'll be working on my entire life. I don't think I've perfected it, and I don't think there's one perfect way, but it's still something that I need to work my step 11. So I still am working on it, and I'm grateful for it. So
thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Question for you about working recovery as a team, husband and wife team. What are the differences you found in the times that you were working recovery alone, and then when your husband started working recovery? Did you see any difference in your relationship? Did you see any difference in the way that you fed off of each other, or were there any differences there?
That's a great question. So when I was doing recovery alone, he knew I was going to a recovery meeting. I had told him, hey, I'm going to go start joining this addiction recovery meeting. And I think at first he might have been nervous about it, but he was very supportive. I do remember, sometimes I remember he would throw my steps at me sometimes. Like, hey, are you trusting God right now? Are you? And I used to get pretty mad. I remember thinking, you should be working. But then I would be grateful later, like, yes, no, I need to keep working these steps. And it brought me a lot of peace. I do feel like it was hard sometimes in our marriage because we were in different places. But now that he has found recovery, because he did eventually find recovery, and working together is different because we can talk about recovery. We kind of can share. We share differently experiences or struggles that we're having. It's nice because we can go to meetings together. Like we go to a regular addiction meeting together, and be able to hear each other in a different setting and hear other people together. But I think it's helped our marriage, and I know it's helped me see addiction in a different light and to see him differently. So but I also have addiction, so I kind of get that part already. So I don't know if I would have had that before or not if I hadn't had addictions, but I just think it's been super helpful in our marriage and definitely has helped us become stronger together and given us understanding, but also to sweep our own sides of the street too, and not for me to try to step in or take over in fixing him or him fixing me, or I don't know if that made any sense, but that's my.
Well, I'm going to follow up on that. So when you see your husband trying to sweep your side of the street, or vice versa, you're trying to sweep his side of the street, how do you deal with that in a healthy way?
I don't think I have an answer for that. I just think, sometimes I don't think we're getting there. I don't I don't know if we're there yet, but we're definitely getting there. Like, I think the best way is to say, I don't like to use you terms when we talk to each other. I like to say I, stay in the I. So I guess I would try to say I feel like my side of the street is mine, and I don't sweep yours. I don't know how to say, other than we can voice to each other, hey, are you trying to control the situation right now? But it's hard to say it in I terms. So, but I think it's okay to say that, like, hey, I love you, but, I love you, and to show me love, don't sweep my side of the street. You sweep yours and I'll sweep mine, and we'll come back together. Maybe pray together. I don't know. I probably need to do that more with my spouse too. So
Great suggestion there. I'll have to work on that too. Hey, so Theron asks, what was it that allowed you to work on your own healing while you watched your husband stay stagnant? What kept you with him when I'm sure it seemed hopeless at times?
That's a great question. I'm going to say it was not easy. It did, like I said, there were times when our marriage became very strained because I was seeking recovery. He was not. I know there were times when he was acting out and in his addiction, and I prayed a lot. I became very reliant on God. I can remember, and probably more so than I am now, sadly, which I want to get back to that. But I would go in. I can remember going in my room, in my closet. That was really where I loved to pray, and going in there, shutting the door, and just, please, God, help me know. Help me know if I need to know anything right now. Help me know if I should say anything, what words to say. Do I stay? There were those prayers. I prayed those prayers. Do I stay? Do I leave? And my answer was always stay. So I stayed, and there was hard times. It was 8 years before he finally decided to go to recovery. And so that was 8 years of me just praying and working my steps. I really think just doing that, working my steps, having a sponsor, I started sponsoring during that time, and just really trying to stay focused on that it's me, not him. Like, I can only change me, fix me, and that he's not perfect, but God loves him just the same. And he was as sick as I was, and just to try to separate that as much as I can. Again, it was really hard. I was in counseling, especially while I was working my steps. When I got to step 4, I started counseling, and he really helped me recognize, sweeping my side, but it was hard. It was very difficult, but I know that it was God that got me through it. And it was God that had me stay, because he knew him, and he knew he was going to find recovery. One way or another, he was going to get there. So I just had to trust that and really work my step 3, trusting God. So it was not easy, but I can look back and I can tell you too that I was happy. There was some moments of joy. I mean, I had my last baby. She was a true joy in my life. I was able to forgive. That didn't mean I had to trust. So that was very freeing. It was freeing to know I did not cause it. I could not cure it. There was a lot of just, and fellowshipping, again, knowing I wasn't alone, my sponsor. I just really had to reach out. I couldn't isolate. If I isolated, when I went into, victim mode and isolation and all of that, that was where life was unmanageable again, and I was back to insanity. And so I really had to create that balance with God and really give it to him. So I'm grateful. I think that was on purpose. I kind of have a rebel spirit. So I know if my husband had found sobriety before me, I probably would have rejected anything he tried to give me. Like, go to meetings. You should go to, like, I have a rebel spirit. So I probably would have been like, no, you don't tell me what to do. So God has a plan. He knows how it needs to play out. And so I just had to trust that. And I just really did. I knew it was going to be okay no matter what. God was going to guide me, and he would tell me when to leave when it was time to leave if he wasn't going to get there, or it was time to go our own ways, whatever. But anyway, I'm just rambling. But thank you.
Thank you, Heather. That's great. You said that you were working your own recovery for 8 years before your husband started working his. How did you handle that? I mean, I would think that one, especially up front, would be like, I need you. You will go to these meetings, husband of mine. How did that transition over time, and how did you trust that God would eventually make your husband, or make it so your husband finally said, all right, I got to do this?
So my bishop that's my leader of my congregation, and that I went and visited, and he was really good at being like, I can't make your husband go. You can't make your husband go. We can't make him convinced he's an addict. Like, we can't do that. And for him to remind me, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, that makes sense. Like, no one can tell. I have that rebel spirit. I don't like to be told who I am or what I am. So I kind of got that, but it was hard. Like I said in the beginning, I did go thinking, they're going to teach me how to change my husband. They're going to teach me how to fix this. And I realized that only God could fix it. And I just knew one of two things was going to happen. Either he was going to find healing somehow, some way through God, because I was praying for that. I'd pray and I'd ask God, please show him, please help him, put people in his life that need to help him see, put people in, I was praying for him the whole time. But I knew one of two things was going to happen. Either he was going to find healing, or he was going to keep going in his addiction, and eventually we would have to go different ways, because it would just become so hard that he probably wouldn't want to be with me anyway, because I would be over here and he'd be over here, and there'd be nothing together. So holding us together anymore. So I knew one of two things had to happen, and I just trusted that God was. I knew he's a good man, and I knew that. And so I knew he would get there. I just knew God had to do it. I couldn't. And just like in my own life, no one's been able to tell me what to do. So I just knew that God had to do it just like he did for me. And I knew if he did it for me, I knew he could do it for him. And so I just kept praying. And I know God answers prayers. I had learned that in my steps. So I just kept doing that. So.
Thank you very much. Reminder, if you have any questions to ask of Heather, please type them in the Q&A so we can get to those. Heather, one of the things that I see semi-regularly when I go into my own fellowships is men who are coming in because their wives made them, or their ecclesiastical leader made them, or because they were caught. It's not that they wanted recovery. How do you see the difference in those things? I think you've touched on it, but what kind of advice do you have for whether it be the addict themselves or the spouse of an addict in those types of situations?
So I think any reason to first start coming to a meeting is a good reason. I mean, even when an ecclesiastical leader or wife says you got to go, I mean, at least it's a foot in the door, because that first time is so scary. And I think, and I know the person has to get to their own rock bottom. They have to. I had someone ask me just recently, how do you tell someone they're an addict? It's like, you don't. God does. I mean, they have to come to that. They have to hit that bottom, hit that point where they become so powerless. Like I was. I knew I was powerless over my husband at this point. My life was completely unmanageable. Everything was falling apart. I felt like everything I'd ever known was completely gone. The rug had been pulled out from under me. I just felt like nothing. It was all gone for me. And some people, it takes that, and others it doesn't. But I think any introduction to, when an ecclesiastical leader asks someone to go to a recovery meeting, it's out of love. I don't think it's out of control. I think it's out of love, and and trying to invite them to do things and come and see. That is, I tell people all that all the time when they ask me about, addiction recovery meetings. Come and see. Just come and see what it's like. And you'll see, hopefully that when you walk in that room, you'll feel that. You'll feel you're not alone. You'll feel suddenly like you're not crazy. That you aren't the only one that felt that way, or what, I've just heard people say things that I needed to hear. My counselor, I love him. He used to encourage me to go to as many meetings as possible because he called it free counseling because people would say stuff. And I always prayed before I went in too. That's something I prayed that I would hear what I needed to hear, that God would teach me what I needed to know that day, or I would share what God wanted me to share. And those have been some of my most, my book, I've got lots of stuff written in there from people, just little tidbits of wisdom from God. I know that's from God. He's in those meetings and he's speaking truth through others to me. And so I think any introduction to a meeting is a good introduction. So whether it's, hopefully their heart will open eventually and they'll see the good that's there.
Thank you, Heather. Before we ask one more question here, if you do have any other questions, please type them in real quick because we've only got one more question before we go to wrap up. But Heather, when you look back at the last, since 2007, what are some of the biggest, what is the biggest change, the biggest difference that has happened in your life that has brought you to where you are today?
That's a really great question. I think the biggest thing that someone ever said to me was, I have an audience of one. Because I felt so unacceptable, so unaccepted, so lonely, just so broken, so full of fear, that to remember that God, all that matters. in the end, that what he and I have together is all that matters. And everything else will fall into place. If that's good, then, I'm going to find peace with people. It's still going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. I still struggle. I'll be honest. I still struggle with my in-laws. I still struggle with friends, or sometimes even, in social groups, I'll say something. I'm like, I said the stupidest. I'll probably even think that after this meeting. I sounded so dumb. I shouldn't have said this. I should have said that. Like I do that to myself, and it drives me nuts. But, and then I just remember, no, it's okay. I gave what I could. God knows me. He knows my heart. And people know me and they know my heart, and whether or not they accept me, it's okay. Like, anyway, I think that's been the biggest thing for me, is just finding acceptance in who I am. Quirky, odd me who has, a loud laugh, and I love to joke and smile a lot and try to find joy in life, and that's okay. I can embrace that, and God's taught me that, because believe it or not, I hated that part of myself, because a lot of voices told me those weren't good things, and so I think finding who I am through all of this, and I am a daughter of God who loves me no matter what. He created me, and he doesn't create junk. He doesn't create trash. He creates beauty and goodness. And so I think that's been the biggest gift for me from this program. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other last words of wisdom or invitations you have for the listeners here today in live? Or, we've got one more question that came in. I'm going to jump on it here. All right. Thank you, Heather, for your participation here. I appreciate your candor and vulnerability. I have found great help and inspiration from your words. I'm a recovering addict with a wife who is standing beside me and has felt that God wants her to stay in spite of what I have done over the course of my life. So it's not a question, but a comment. Anything you have to say about that?
I am so glad that your wife is there with you. I think that is so important to have that support from a spouse, if you can have it, and how hard it is. I know it's hard to find that peace in a marriage sometimes. And so I often think of marriages that are broken, and it's just finding that peace, even if it can't last, finding peace with each other as you separate or whatever. And it just is so important, no matter what happens, to find that peace with each other and peace with God, and just finding that healing, whatever it's going to end up looking like. It can be healing for each of you. And so I just always hope that women find God in it, and help them understand and see their spouse as who they truly are, and whether or not that is something to stay in or not is up to between them and God. I never judge that, but I was with some pretty abusive men, and I know God did not want that for me. He's the one that got me out of those relationships, and so I know he did not want that for me. And so I don't encourage that, but I do encourage any of my friends, when they come and talk to me, that to try and find healing, whatever that looks like. Find out from God. Don't make those judgments until God tells you. So, and find some healing before you make those decisions too. I think that's super important. Finding healing for yourself and figuring out what God wants. So, anyway, I'm just super, that touches my heart, and so glad that you have that in your life. I think any support that you have in addiction is amazing, and especially with a spouse, someone to walk with. That is such a blessing, and give gratitude to God for that every day. So
Thank you, Heather. Thanks, everybody. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to RICO12/forum, RICO12.com/forum, and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. Next week, we have an awesome guest speaker, Amy. I'm excited to talk to Amy B. It should be a really good one. If you have not yet gone to RICO12.com and submitted your email address, and remember, you only need to do that once, please get on the invitation list so that you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Now, as we wrap this up, Heather has asked if she can say a prayer from the heart to send us off into our day. Please join her with us.
Our dear, kind, gracious Heavenly Father, I'm so very grateful for thy goodness and for thy love. Grateful for Bill W. and the doctor who were inspired many years ago to create the big book, and that is based on so many fellowships that help so many people today, and that has helped people find healing and comfort in thee. Please bless anyone who may be listening to this and seeking help and healing, that they will know where to go and find strength. That those who are, whether they are in addiction or live with a loved one in addiction, can see thy hand and thy guidance. Grateful for thee once again. Help us to be humble, to rid ourselves of pride and ego, to sometimes when I think that I'm know better and am the higher power, that thou wilt show me and remind me of thy power and thy works. So grateful for, again, for these steps, for sponsors who are willing to take the time to share and guide and bring people to thee. Continue to bless them in their work, and those who may even be thinking about it, that they will embrace it and take that leap of faith and know that thou art the one that creates the healing, and we are just the guide and the tool in thy hands, and give gratitude for those opportunities and those experiences. We truly love thee and say these things in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Heather. Keep coming back. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it. We'll see you all next week.
Standing, I will fight the good fight.